a very sad day for Australia because, of course, we heard this morning at 9:30 that wasn't surprising to us, I'm sure, that the vote went against the no vote. The yes vote prevailed, and of course we understand what that exactly means, and as we said, it doesn't really surprise us. We know that Bible prophecy dictates, Isaiah tells us that the time will come when they will call good, the sanctity of a wholesome marriage. They'll call good evil and evil good, and we're seeing all that being played out in the world today, and of course today in Australia. So a sad day as far as that is concerned, but not unexpected really, is it? And we all look forward to the return of the Lord Jesus Christ, when all of these ills will be done away with, and we will see true good restored, which is what we're all looking forward to. But of course, until the Lord comes, we're asked to occupy, and that's what we're doing. We're occupying till he comes, and we're here tonight to go through God's Word and hopefully be encouraged by our study on the book of Judges. And tonight in the book of Judges, we're going to continue to unravel some of these incredible events that occurred at this time period, and the circumstances that we're going to see unfolding are quite amazing. But we do need, of course, to continue a little bit with the background. We couldn't cover it all last week. And then we'll analyse, God willing, if we've got enough time, a couple of Judges at the end. So tonight's theme is God's strength made perfect in weakness, a quote that the Apostle Paul makes, and a very valid quote to take that in its context of how Paul even used it, and to bring it in and put it across the era of the Judges. We'll have a look at that comment in Corinthians in a moment or two. We'll just go through some few bases before we get there, but we need to understand that term, God's strength made perfect in weakness, and how it does apply to the era of the Judges. Of course, this comment here was made 1,200 years after the era of the Judges, but it's very, very apt and very applicable to our study this evening. This is a quote that we spoke about at length last week, and we spoke about it because it was quite an interesting concept that's portrayed to us in that quotation there. Every man did that which is right in his own eyes, and we're not going to labour that point again. But the second part of that quote, of course, is in those days there was no king in Israel. Now we believe, of course, Samuel wrote the book of Judges. And it's an unusual comment for him to make that because, of course, he knew there was no king in the time of the Judges, but when it came time for the children of Israel, 300 years after this was first written, they didn't want God as their king anymore. They wanted to have a king they could see, and they wanted to enjoy all of the same benefits of having an earthly king like the other surrounding nations had. And of course, Samuel in himself felt as though he was rejected, and God said, no, Samuel, just hang on a second. They're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. And God could have said, Samuel, you wrote the book of Judges. They rejected me 300 years ago. You wrote it. There was no king in Israel. Of course there was a king in Israel. We already said that. We've established that. They moved across into the promised land. So they had people, they had a geography, they had a country, they had laws, and all of those, the governments that went with those laws and the law of Moses, and they had a king, and that constituted them as a kingdom, and their king was God. But of course, in the period of the Judges, all the people say, no, we haven't got a king. He doesn't exist. We don't have a king. And as a result of that, no king in Israel, no leadership. Joshua had died. Leadership was gone. And of course, you make a great pathway to massive problems that we're about to unravel in this time period. We also made a point, I really love this little area here, because what a lot of people didn't realise, some of the young people didn't realise, that during the story of the Judges, we have this beautiful little story going on in the background of Ruth and Naomi. They left Israel during the time of the Judges because of the great famine that came on there. I'd like to think it wasn't just a physical no food famine. I'd like to think also the spiritual famine was great at the time, and they just, what was going on really irked them, even though Naomi is the one that is really the faithful one in that story. And of course Ruth becomes faithful as she joins affinity with Naomi. But what a great little story when you see that God is very disappointingly focusing his eyes on the era of the judges, and he's having a look at what's going on, and the broken people are frustrating him time and time and time again, and he's so disappointed, he's so frustrated, as we read tonight, he's so angry. But at the same time, every now and again, as he takes his gaze off the era of the judges, he looks over there. He sees this little family over there in Moab, eking out an existence with tragedies striking them. Death of the father, the husband, and then the death of the two sons. And he's watching them, and he's watching here, and he's got his heart's reaching out to them, and his anger is boiling over with the people here, and he's going to bring those two episodes together, and we're going to have one great, wonderful story with the story of Naomi and Ruth being encapsulated into a bigger story of the time of the era of the judges. So it's quite a nice little scenario. It's one of those little glimmers of hope, that little bright spark that you see in the era of the judges. So it's very good to try and picture that scene of God looking at those two aspects at that time. Now, you all know, with our Sunday school lessons, I'm talking our age group now, the cycle pattern of the book of Judges. This is something I always remember as a child growing up through the Sunday school, and particularly I think it might be starting at the intermediate lessons, where we have this cycle of the judges, this pattern of the judges that comes up time and time and time again throughout that era. And I've looked online to see if there's different ways of understanding it. I'll show you the usual one that we have in our Sunday school books in a minute, but this one's quite a good one. It starts off, this is the cycle. Israel disobeys God. As a result of that, Israel is oppressed. That turns into suffering for Israel, and they're crying out to God for deliverance. And God hears their prayers. He's mindful of their suffering. He raises up a deliverer. Israel is delivered. Israel is at peace. And then they start that cycle all over again. Now you have a look at that reading for tonight. We can see it even here in the first few verses that Brian read for us. In verse 11, the children of Israel, this is a little bit of a summary, by the way, in leading up to the deliverers, the judges, a bit of a summary of what was going on in Israel and how it was going to unfold over the next 300 years. And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. So they disobeyed God. So what does God do in verse 14? His anger is so hot against Israel, he delivers them into the hands of the spoilers. And we're going to see, as time goes on, not just in the short amount of series of judges we're going to do this year, but God willing, if we follow it up next year, we're going to see the different spoilers that came along and took control of the land of Israel at that time, and they made their life miserable. Verse 15, the last part, they were greatly distressed. And so what did they do? They cried out to God. They're looking for deliverance. And verse 16, God raised up judges and delivered them out of the hand. And then it goes on, starts all over again. They just go back into this same cycle. It doesn't end. When you come to the story of Othniel in verse 7 of chapter 3, it's probably even highlighted even better there. The children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. Verse 8, he sold them as a result of this. His anger was hot against Israel, and he sold them to the Mesopotamians. Verse 9, they cried out to Yahweh. They were so distressed with their circumstances. And in verse 10, Yahweh delivered them. But of course, Othniel dies, doesn't he, in verse 11. Verse 12, the children of Israel did evil again. So the whole cycle just continues on. Do you find that in your own life sometimes, brothers and sisters? We get into this cycle where, we start off with knowing that we're on the wrong track, and we realise that things aren't going well in our life, and we cry out to God for help and assistance, and we then, in our own life and with God's help and assistance, decide that we're going to make some changes, and we make some changes, and we're going pretty good, and everything seems fine, and then we drift back into the old way. It's like a cycle. It's the cycle of sin and death, isn't it? And sadly, these people, of course, were just so trapped in this cycle that they couldn't seem to get themselves out of it. This is another one. This one I always remember in Sunday school, and I think everyone will remember this. This is the one, of course, that starts off with sin brings suffering, and suffering of course, causes them to seek God, and seeking God brings salvation. The 4 S's. It sounds a bit like an Uncle Purse. I'm not sure if that's one of his or not. Probably out of the story of the Bible, I'm sure, and it's made its way into the Sunday school lessons over many, many, many years. This is another one. I thought this one's quite good too. Rejection brings retribution. Repentance, therefore, brought rescue, but then they relapsed. So we've got all the R's there together. 5 stages in that one, because I guess it doesn't end with salvation. Unfortunately, it starts the whole cycle all over again. So it's an interesting concept to understand that the period of the Judges is this ongoing cycle, this pattern that is very evident, and we need to understand that that can be our life as well, and we need to somehow break that cycle as best we can. But being human nature, we know that we're continually going to fall, and we're continually going to get into this cycle of sin and then seeking for forgiveness and then back into sin. But we really do need to try our very best to break that cycle. Sadly, the children of Israel were really going from bad to worse. You might have picked up in the reading that it seems as though when you read that particular section, I think it's in verse 20, the anger of the Lord, this is chapter 2, the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, he said, because you've transgressed. So it starts all over again. And then it says they actually did worse. They actually became worse. They kept on going from bad to worse, as if that's possible. So they start off doing bad things, and by the time you get down the track, they're really falling off the rails. They've really fallen off the pathway of truth. And God was still prepared to reach out and save his people. That's what I love about the book of Judges. He never stands back and said, I'm wiping my hands of all you lot. You're on your own. I don't care what happens to you. I'm going to start again somewhere else. He doesn't do it. He keeps on reaching out, because the power of God's mercy and his compassion is such that he does have exactly that. He is full of compassion. He is full of mercy. And whilst one moment his anger is so hot, he is breathing out such anger against his people, and he just cannot work out why they keep doing it. When he sees them suffering and he sees them on bended knee crying, the absolute opposite comes over the Father. And he's compassionate and he's kind, and he says, I don't like seeing them like this. I've got to reach out to them. And so he raises up a deliverer to get them out of the mess they're in. Great to know that, isn't it? Really is good to know that, because I tell you what, we cling to those types of aspects of our Heavenly Father because we need it. We do need it. We let him down so badly with all manner of sins. We do let him down. But we're just so happy that his compassion and mercy is so great that he will continue to reach down to us if we are truly sorry for our sins. Well, now the Judges. I've got a list of them up here. Some of these you'll know very well. Others you've probably never even heard of before. And if you have, you probably don't know too much about them. So this is half of them. It was 14 judges altogether. 2, 4, 6, 7 there. If we got a time, we'll do Othniel and Shamgar tonight, but we got Othniel, of course, the first judge, then Ehud, and these are their meanings, their names, the tribes, the enemy that they were facing at the time, the years of oppression and the years of peace as a result of those judges coming onto the scene. Some of these we know. You might not know too much about Othniel. You probably know a little bit about Ehud. Shamgar we know very little about, very little. Deborah, of course, we know a lot about Deborah. Gideon, we know a lot about Gideon. Who's ever heard of Tola? What did he do? Quite interesting. I said last week about Pip, the nobody that nobody knew. You probably could throw a few of these judges into that category of talks you could do. But Jair is another one. Jephthah, of course, we know a little bit about Jephthah. We said last week, it's interesting how the Judges throws in this little red herring in the book of Judges about a concept of did Jephthah literally sacrifice his daughter, or didn't he? I think the general consensus of opinion, and I know that Lionel's very much with me on this one, that he didn't sacrifice his daughter literally. There are some that will argue and put up a reasonable case that perhaps he did, but there's a little aspect in Jephthah's life that has always been a talking point amongst Christadelphians. Ibzan. Never really knew much about him. Elon, don't know him. Abdon, who knows all these judges? I don't know much about them all. Samson, one of our favourites. We all know Samson and what he was He was like Eli, of course, the neglectful judge, and then Samuel, the transitional judge. So basically all of this information is pretty straightforward, but at the same time we've got 14 judges and we've got 14 episodes in Israel's history where God provided deliverers. We made a point that the word judge here in the book of Judges doesn't necessarily mean like Samuel did. He did actually do the work of a judge. He did go on his circuit and he judged matters of the law and so on and so forth, but Othniel wasn't one of those types of judges. The word judge, if you look it up, means liberator, rescuer, deliverer. So that's what they were. They were designed to deliver and rescue the people in their time of need. So let's have a look at this theme now, this area that Paul talks about, God's strength made perfect in weakness. So let's look up the quote, 2 Corinthians chapter 12. Apostle Paul, of course, and we'll speak a little bit about how this context of how this quote came about. So the quote's there in verse 9, and he said unto me, my strength is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Now, the context of Paul, that quote being said there, and Paul is quoting what God had told him, he said unto me, my grace is sufficient for you, Paul. My strength, this is God speaking to Paul, my strength is made perfect in weakness. Well, what's the context? Well, the context of that, we haven't got time to read all the previous verses, but the context of that is that Paul wants to make it absolutely clear he does not want to be put on a pedestal. He does not want to be bragging about himself. He does not want pride to take over his life and all of a sudden he's showing himself somebody he knows he's not. He says, I understand that. In fact, when you have a look at the previous verses, he says, you know what, in verse 5, or 6 rather, for though I would desire to glory, I shall not be a fool, for I will say the truth. But now I forbear, lest any man should think of me above that which he seeth me to be, or that he heareth me to be. I don't want people putting me on a pedestal, he said. I don't want it. And lest I should be exalted above measure, verse 7, through the abundance of the revelations, there was given to me a thorn in the flesh, the messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I should be exalted above measure. Now that's an interesting comment. Paul was saying, and we know this to be the case in the life of the Apostle Paul, Paul was saying, I've got a disability. It's been given to me, he said. God's allowed me to have this disability in my life. It was a physical disability. There's been conjecture as to what really was wrong with Paul. Some suggested he had a malaria at one stage and had the outcome of malaria, which I'm not sure exactly what that is. Some say poor affected your eyesight, so he couldn't see as well as what he would like. Others say he stuttered, because it does mention about being hard of speech, so he might have had an impediment with his speech. Others, I've heard some say he couldn't hear properly, and that's another thing from malaria. So we don't know exactly what it was. We have no idea, but it really grated on Paul, and he prayed 3 times to God. He said in verse 8, for this disability I've got, he said, I prayed 3 times to God to please take it from me. I don't want it in my life. It's just annoying me. It's a horrible thing. It's a natural thing to do, isn't it? If you had that sort of a physical disability that was very noticeable to others around you, you would want to get rid of it. You would pray for it. He said, I didn't pray once, twice. I prayed 3 times. And that's when God said to me, Paul, my grace is sufficient for you. Don't worry about that disability. Don't worry about it. For my strength is made perfect in your weakness. In your weakness, Paul. My strength is made perfect in your weakness. Now you might think, well, what on earth's that got to do with the theme or the book of the era of the book of Judges? Well, when you have a look, and we're going to show you this in a moment, when you have a look at the way in which God saved Israel, it was through the most inconspicuous, weak things. God's strength was made perfect in weakness time and time and time again in the deliverance of Israel during the era of the Judges. And the last thing that God wanted, in context of how Paul was wording these particular sections of Corinthians, the last thing that God wanted was for Israel to have some sort of bragging rights that, look at our God, he's called thunder and earthquakes and lightning and all these things from heaven. He must be pretty impressed with us to save us. Look at it. But when you see how God did deliver Israel, there was no bragging rights. It was in the most inconspicuous, weak manner that you could ever even begin to imagine. And his strength was made perfect through the inconspicuous, weak things which he used deliberately to save Israel. There was never going to be any bragging rights on the behalf of Israel at that particular time. What about Israel today, brothers and sisters, young people? Have a think about them. Boy, they brag about their strength, don't they? How strong they are. How they've fought 5 wars and won every one of them. One, they struggled a little bit, but they ended up winning anyway. 5 wars, one particularly spectacular war that we celebrated this year, 50 years, the 1967 war. They have really bragged loud and clear how strong and how mighty they are, the very pride of Israel. Incredible. Of course, we know that God said he would be with Israel, and God has been fighting behind the scenes for that nation. When Russia comes down, we'll speak about this in a little bit later in this, but when Russia comes down, God's going to step back. He's going to say, so you think you really have the bragging rights that you've done all this on your own? All right, let's see how you go now. And he's just going to basically just step back and watch. And it's going to be almost an annihilation until he steps back in again. So God's strength is going to be made perfect in weakness throughout the book of Judges. His salvation came in the most inconspicuous ways. This is quite a good quotation in Psalm 33. The king is not saved by his great army. A warrior is not delivered by his great strength. The war horse is a false hope for salvation, and by its great might it cannot rescue. Behold, the eye of the Lord is on those who fear him, on those who hope in his steadfast love, that he may deliver their soul from death and keep them alive in famine. That's what was going on in the time of the era of the Judges, brothers and sisters. It wasn't just a physical famine, it was a spiritual famine. And I love to think that those words there are so applicable to Ruth and Naomi, who had escaped out of that era of the Judges and gone them over there in Moab. Whether it was a right or wrong thing, doesn't matter. God's not forsaking them. I'm going to deliver their soul from death and I'm going to keep them alive in famine. And you know what? When you go through the book of Judges and you have a look at the era, the time that they were saved, it wasn't by great armies. It wasn't by great war horses. It wasn't by any of those things. It was by the inconspicuous, weak little things that God's strength was made perfect. It's quite interesting when you consider that. God saved his people from death time and time again, and he was able to do so in inconspicuous ways. So I'm going to put up a series of slides now, and I want you to yell out to me. It's a very inconspicuous little thing I'm going to put on the screen. I want you to yell out to me who the judge was. Pretty easy, it's not hard. How much more inconspicuous can you get a dry bone sitting out in the desert? I mean, that's a pretty inconspicuous means of saving people, but who's this? Who's the judge? Samson. Delivered the people with the jawbone of an ass. Provided 20 years of peace. Now, I know he did other things, but that is quite pivotal to Samson's life. The jawbone of an ass. He delivered the people. Any idea? Gives me a chance to have a glass of water, everyone's thinking. Yeah, who said that? That you, Mace? Our illustrious doorman? That's your wife, was it? Okay, Jerusha, well done. Shamgar, that's an ox goad. I mean, that's a pretty insignificant little tool. I mean, probably every man his dog had one of those out, well, not a dog, but out in the field there, prodding the cattle. It was around about 9 feet high. It had the hooks on it like that. It was just designed to push cattle and herd them in the right direction. Well, Shamgar delivered Israel with that. How inconspicuous is that? God's strength was made perfect in such a weak episode, little inconspicuous instrument in the hands of a faithful man. Incredible. About that? Jael. Now, Jael wasn't necessarily a judge, but I tell you what, she goes hand in hand with, of course, Deborah. And there's two women here, brothers and sisters, that played a pivotal role in delivering Israel. More so than any other brother that was in the truth at the time. More so than Barak. Deborah and Jael. Now, don't before all the women say, are you saying women are significant and weak? And I'm not saying that at all. But when you look at the instruments that they used, two women, a hammer and a tent peg, ended up 40 years of peace. Now, I know God caused the rain to sort of start the whole thing going, the process of the demise of Sisera and his army, but it wasn't until this action took place that it was true deliverance. Two women, a tent peg and a hammer, and you got 40 years of peace. God's strength made perfect in weakness. That just keeps on coming out time and time again in the book of Judges. You're probably going to have a little smile on your face when I show you this next one, but someone should know what this one's about. Who's that? It's Eglon with... Who's the judge? Someone said it before. Ehud. Now you might say, well, what is inconspicuous? Here is a left-handed man. That's all we're told about this judge. He's a left-handed man with a dagger that provides deliverance for Israel. There's no great, massive, mighty army. I know there was a little bit of uprising amongst the people at the time that followed Ehud into war, but that's what precipitated it. That's what started the whole thing. So inconspicuous, a left-handed man with a dagger. And he took on arguably the fattest man in the world at the time, and he won. There was no huge military coup. It was done by a left-handed man. Now, this next one is quite interesting. I don't know if this happened in the era of the judges, by the way, and it's not necessarily going to talk about a judge, but does anyone know who that might be there? One of these bloodthirsty, blood-curdling times in Israel's history during the era of the judges. This is a time after Gideon, Gideon being the judge, and he had one particular son that was the most diabolical, bloodthirsty character of the Bible. Does anyone know what his name was? Good eye, Steve. Abimelech. Now, Abimelech was a pretty proud, arrogant sort of a character, and we know that from how he died, and I'll tell you something about that in a minute. But here's Abimelech, and he wants to lay claim to being the head over Shechem. So he has to do this at the demise of those that are heirs before him. He happened to have 70 brothers. I'll tell you what, Gideon was a fairly busy man. He had a lot of wives and he had a lot of children. He had at least 70 sons, it says. So he had 70 brothers. It says he wiped out all of them except the youngest, which was Jotham. He ends up staying alive. But at the end of the day, he claims rulership over Shechem and he wants to spread his power base. So he's now cornering various towns around the place and he wants to be the ruler over all of this and probably has his eyes on ruling over the whole of Israel, wants to become king over all of Israel. It's a very nasty time during the Judges, and although, as we said, there's no actual judge mentioned in this particular episode, it did happen during the period of the book of Judges. So Abimelech comes to a little insignificant little town called Thebes. It's all recorded in Scripture. Comes to this little insignificant town in Thebes. He surrounds the tower. He's the number one honcho. He's the big character. He's the one that's going to take control. He's already killed 70 of his brothers. He's already ruined the lives of many others in his quest to become ruler. And he gets to this town, insignificant little town, and all the people are so frightened they huddle up into the tower of the town, and all the elders are up there. And he comes up to the walls and he's probably shouting and yelling and saying, "Give up." And they wouldn't. He said, "Right, I'm setting fire to this. You're all going to burn to death. That's the end of it." And a woman gets hold of a millstone, picks it up, a woman, and throws it over the wall and clouts him right on the noggin. Bang. Doesn't kill him, almost knocks him out. Almost, not quite. A woman, how insignificant is that? A woman with a millstone, throws it over, lands on his head. Now here is the deal with Abimelech. If you read the record, and it's all there in the book of Judges, he turns to his armour bearer and says, "Oh, been hit." He looks up, he sees a woman hanging over the wall that's just dropped the millstone. He says, "My armour bearer, come here." "Yeah, what do you want?" "Kill me. Just strike me through with a sword. Kill me now." "Why? What do you want me to do that for?" "Because I think I'm going to die and I do not want to go down in history as being killed by a woman with a stone." That's what he said. Exactly what he said. "I don't want to go down in history by being killed in a most inconspicuous, weak manner by a woman who threw a stone over the wall." Mind you, I'm pretty certain it would have been a pretty heavy, big stone that hit him in the head. But you see the point we're making. There were so many weak, inconspicuous events that are going on in the time of the judges that God's strength is made perfect in weakness. And of course that paved the way for the ongoing plan of purpose of God to be unfolded. Here's another one. That's a pretty easy one. We should all know that. Yell it out. Gideon. How interesting is that? 300 men with earthen vases or pitchers, I think they called them, and they had little lamps inside them. And then, of course, when they've got time, they smashed the lamps and went down in amongst over 100,000 men and made absolute havoc amongst the enemy. 300 men taking on over 100,000 enemy. You talk about inconspicuous, brothers and sisters. This is probably on paper, not in reality, because we know God was actually with these people, this band with Gideon and his men. But on paper, it's 300 men taking on a massive, well-trained army. How weak is that? How weak is this army? It's the weakest army on record, really. But God says, "My strength will be made perfect in weakness." So Gideon, of course, was the subject of that particular area there. All right, one more. Who's that? God's strength made perfect in weakness. Any idea? You can sort of picture the scene, a whole group of people and some guy over there, "Oh, no one wants me, no one loves me, I'm getting out of here." Social outcast, not wanted by his family or by his city. Jephthah. That's Jephthah. Not wanted by his family, not wanted by his city. He actually ran off. He got caught up with a whole heap of knuckleheads, total absolute losers, small-time thugs. He got caught up in the wrong crowd. And suddenly, how insignificant is that, by the way? And suddenly God uses him to deliver Israel. My strength is made perfect in weakness. And of course, we can't go past this one. It's all the era of Judges, isn't it? I don't think you can get anything more insignificant than two widows. One who was penniless and old, and the other who was destitute, young and lonely. Naomi and Ruth, two totally insignificant in the cultural times of the day. Widows were not up on the priority list of being looked after in those times, as we know. They were the lowest, most insignificant human beings from a biblical, cultural, time era point of view. That's how they were seen, but not by God. They weren't seen like that. But this is total weakness personified in two women. But God's ultimate strength, brothers and sisters, was made perfect through these two women. Because as we know, the Lord Jesus Christ is soon to return to this earth and do away with all the stuff that we can see going on in this earth. He's going to come back and set up a kingdom, and he was born as a result of these two women, the faith of these two women. God's strength made perfect in weakness. You couldn't get a greater scenario than that. Absolutely incredible. And I think, brethren and sisters, when it comes down to us, we sometimes feel we are insignificant in the truth, and that's probably rightly so. We shouldn't see ourselves as being anyone special or anyone important. But I think it's a problem that we feel that maybe we're utterly useless at times in the truth, that God can't work through us. We're just nobodies. And we understand and sometimes feel that we're not needed in the ecclesia. We don't really do anything. We don't speak. I have to say this, brothers and sisters, and I think you would agree with this, some of the best brethren and sisters and their families are very inconspicuous brothers and sisters in the truth. The brother might never speak on the platform, might not ever be on the arranging brethren's committee or other committees. They might not ever speak. They're not in the limelight at all, but they are consistent people in the truth. They are consistent people living the truth. They are consistent people showing an example in the truth, even though they've never attracted any limelight. Brothers and sisters like that? I do, and I'm sure you do. That's God's strength being made perfect through inconspicuous and weak, sort of not headlining type people. That's really, brothers and sisters, how we should view our own selves, each other, that we can all be an instrument in the hands of God so that his strength is made perfect in weakness and that his grace is more than sufficient in our very weak and erring lives. Now, I was going to do two judges. Time's against us. I'm going to do very quickly one. We're going to do Othniel. Very quick, so don't panic. Won't go over time. Mentioned 6 times in Scripture. Othniel. Come back to Judges chapter 3. Othniel. Now, Othniel, of course, mentioned 6 times in Scripture. His name means the Lion of God, and he plays quite a pivotal role in Scripture. We have the story of Othniel and from verses 7 to 11 of chapter 3. We've already read some of this. The children of Israel did evil in the sight of God again, so they were delivered into the hand of Cushan-Rishathaim, king of the Mesopotamians, and of course they suffered greatly under his particular rule. For 8 years they had to serve this particular king, and then it says God raised up Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. So what do we know about Othniel? Well, he's the nephew of Caleb. His name means the Lion of God. His wife's name was Aksah. She was the daughter of Caleb. And his 2 sons were Hathath and Meonothai. Might not mean much to you, but what we're being told here, he was an ordinary family man. He was just a family man. And he's chosen by God because of some trait that he had to deliver Israel in their time of need. And it's really quite interesting when you look at the Spirit of God that came upon him in verse 10. That's quite often the case in many of the judges. Of course, it happened with Gideon, happened with Jephthah, it happened with Samson, even happened with Saul and David. The Spirit of God came upon them. What do we understand about that? Some people have suggested, the Spirit of God came upon them. Instantly they became like robots. They became killing machines. Nothing could stop them. Wherever they went, they just slayed everybody, and nobody, whatever they tried to do, was as if they had a force field around them, and the person that the Spirit of God came upon them really had no idea what they were doing. They were just doing the will of God and killing all these people, because it does seem strange, doesn't it? Particularly when you get to Samson killing all those Philistines and Shamgar, it does seem strange. How can they do all that on their own? Well, of course, they didn't do it on their own. They had the Spirit of God upon them. Othniel obviously wanted to deliver Israel. He wanted to get rid of the scourge of the Mesopotamians. He wanted to do that. And God said, well, okay, I'm going to give you a little bit of a boost of energy to be able to do it. And did he ever? And that's what it means by the Spirit of God came upon them. And they knew 100%. Brethren and sisters, young people, these judges knew, when that Spirit came upon them, they knew exactly what they were doing. They knew exactly what they were doing. They were upholding God's righteousness, and they wanted to save the people. You know, when the Lord Jesus Christ returns to this earth, and we're going to say we want to be part of the cleaning up of this world. We want to be a part, keeping in the context of Judges, to save Israel from utter annihilation by the hands of Russia and her confederate powers. We want to do that, and God will say, that's fine. I'll put my Spirit upon you and you'll be able to do it. We're not going to go into a trance as if we don't know what we're doing. We're going to carry out all those forms of judgment that are in Zechariah, that are in Joel, that are in Daniel, that are in Ezekiel. We're going to be able to have the power of God streaming and coursing through our veins, that we can call upon nature itself to destroy the kingdom of men, not just Russia and its confederate powers, but all the ships of Tarshish and all the kingdom of men. They're all going to come to a total and absolute annihilation because of you and me, with the Spirit of God that has come upon us, because we're going to be chosen to rescue, to judge. In this term, we understand the word judge. We're going to rescue, we're going to liberate Israel from total annihilation. That's what we're going to do. So we're going to find out, you and I are actually going to find out what it's like to have the Spirit of God coming upon us. We will feel it. We'll feel that energy. We will feel the power coursing through our veins, and God will allow us to use his power to save his people. One thing we know about Othniel. Now have a look at this. Turn over to 1 Chronicles 27. This is something I think is very interesting about why was this even mentioned here in 1 Chronicles 27. When you get to 1 Chronicles 27, we have David listing all the list of David's army units, his military units, and he's listing them all, and he's telling us who is in charge of each of the particular units. Now, this is hundreds of years after Othniel died. All right, this is not in the same era as Othniel. This is hundreds of years later. Othniel's dead. Do you know any of your relations hundreds of years ago? I haven't got a clue. I only can go back to my grandfather. But if you can go back 4, 5, 6 generations, good on you. I bet your great ancestors probably don't get a name like this, because in 1 Chronicles 27, it's just a simple comment, I know, but it says in verse 15, and this is David's military units. Here it is. The 12th captain for the 12th month was Heldai, the Netophathite of Othniel. Now, when you look up the other translation, it's almost deliberately saying, oh, by the way, Heldai, he's an ancestor of Othniel. And everyone go, oh, what, really? He's Othniel's ancestor. Why would you put that in there? I mean, I'm sure he's not just of Othniel. I think he's probably, there's plenty of generations before you get to Othniel. But it's almost as if the writer of this particular verse is saying Othniel, it was an iconic figure in Israel's history because of what he did. An absolute iconic figure. So I think we'll find that Othniel, even though he's not mentioned very much in Scripture, he is certainly one of these men that commands respect because of his attitude and his willingness, and he wants to stand up for what's right. Now, this is my last slide, or second to last, but I think there was some romance with Othniel's life. A little bit of romance in the time of Othniel. Because if you come back to Judges chapter 1, we're told a little bit about him. So we get this idea of him wanting to be settled down as a family man and falling in love with this girl. And the girl happens to be, I know it was his cousin, because it's Caleb's daughter, but at the end of the day that was common practice then to marry cousins and some other relations there. But this one here has got a little bit of romance, I think, in the story, because in verses 2 to 13, we're not going to go through it, but the story is, of course, that Caleb verses 12 and 13, Caleb wants to put out a challenge. And the challenge is in verse 12, he that smiteth Kirjath-sepher and taketh it, to him will I give Achsah my daughter to wife. So the challenge is, right, there's a city there, there's a town there, there's a village there, there's an area there that I want captured. I don't like the people that are in it. That's got to be captured. Who's up to the challenge? By the way, whoever's up to the challenge gets my daughter as a wife. Immediately, Othniel, I'm off. That's me. I'm there. And it says there in verse 13, and Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, took it. He went and just grabbed that city. And as a result, of course, he was able to marry the daughter of Caleb. Now, you don't go out and fight a battle that is life-threatening for somebody you had no feelings for. Othniel had feelings for this girl. There's a little bit of romance here. And it doesn't end there, because the story goes on to tell us that they obviously became married, and Achsah, Caleb's wife, says to Othniel, hey, listen, go and see Dad. It's in the following verses. Go and see Dad and see if we can get a better area of land that we can dwell in that's got a bit more water, because we want to raise a family, we want to raise cattle, we want to do all these things. What about we talk to Dad and we see if we can get a better area of land? Caleb, of course, Joshua's dead. Caleb's now basically in charge. He's giving out some of the portions of land, and she says, come on, can you go and see Dad? Well, record tells us it ends up her that speaks to Dad, but the point is they're both talking together, husband and wife. They want to start a family, they want to have a better area to work with, and they really are looking forward to a life together. It's just a lovely little romantic story that you see leaping out of the book of the Judges. And of course, all happening behind the scenes, there's all this other atrocious things that are going on. And of course, they were given a nice little tidy sum of land in verse 15, and of course, the next episode of Othniel is when he's delivering Israel. So it's a great little story. We're not going to go into anything more than the fact that the Spirit of God came upon him and he was able to deliver Israel from the Mesopotamians. It's hard to imagine he worked alone when you look at those verses, or verse 10. It doesn't say that he had others with him. It's all in the singular. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him. He judged Israel and went out to war. His hand prevailed against Cushan-Rishathaim. So it's almost talking as if it's singular. Now, he may have had a band of helpers, another part of the army of people helping him. We don't know. But as far as God was concerned, that man there stood head and shoulders above everybody else with his faith, with the ability he had, with his understanding that God was going to be with him, and therefore God gave him that spirit power to be able to do the job he needed to do. And of course he died. Othniel died, the son of Kenaz died, and as a result of that, of course, we then go into that cycle again of Israel sinning and so on. I'm not going to do any more tonight. I was going to do Shamgar, but it's too late. What I do want to do is start that next week, God willing, but hopefully we're starting to now get into the Judges a little bit more, and God willing we'll continue to explore this wonderful, wonderful book.